Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm looking at Game 9 from the World Chess Championship. Magnus Carlsen had the black pieces today, and coming off a loss, it was interesting to see how this game was going to proceed. And Karjakin, of course, had the white pieces, and this is the first game I've annotated since Game 1. And this game really piqued my interest because of the occurrence of one of my favorite chess themes, which is Blockade. So here we go. And as a matter of fact, the game just finished a few minutes ago. And I was thinking Karjakin had some chances to win this game. And I figured if he could win this second game in a row, it would really, really put Carlsen in a bad situation. And I thought that Karjakin was right to try to play on in this game, but Carlsen kept his cool and defended calmly and was able to draw. But I just want to briefly go over this uh, without any real deep analysis, but just talk about the main theme, which is, from my perspective, which was blockade in this game. So I'm gonna whiz through the opening and not get bogged down in a whole lot of theory and lack thereof. So e4, e5 was played, and we had this Roy Lopez occur on the board. And we see bishop c5 here, and I forget the name of this variation. Is it important? I think it's one of the nicknames is the Archangelisk or the Archangel variation. Um, but again, we're just gonna go through these moves quickly to get to basically our main position here. Okay. So in this line, black sacrifices pawn for additional activity. But again, I want to move quickly through this opening phase and start here. So what we're seeing, just real quick, as far as imbalances are concerned, we can see that although black is a pawn down, this is one of the themes of the opening. Although black is a pawn down, uh, excuse me, although white is winds up being a pawn down. No, I'm tripping right now. Although white winds up having the extra pawn, black has a more solid position. However, I like white's position better. One is because he has two bishops, and as a result of his damaged pawns, he has a bunch of open lines. And we're going to see that clearly is to his advantage later in this position. Okay, so I want to get to the critical position here. Okay, so we see build up on this pawn right here. Okay, and we can see the damaged nature of the white pawn structure. Again, you might think, just looking at it, that white is in trouble, but white, in compensation for these damaged pawns, he has a lot of open files and diagonals in order to attack the king. And there's no doubt that should be white's plan in this position. We have the open G file for the rooks, and we have these two beautiful diagonals along with another open file for the rook. So black should definitely be trying to arrange an attacking plan. Meanwhile, black's plan is to judiciously trade pieces and try to mute white's attack that is going to come against the king. If black can somehow make it to an endgame with this damaged pawn structure, he would have actually good winning chances at the end. So c takes b3, bishop takes b3. Of course, Magnus is not going to let his queen be traded here. Now this is where I really want to like lay down and start discussing the position. I probably should have just started the game right here. Again, we see open diagonals and a lot of open lanes. And this is white's compensation for having this damaged pawn structure, right? Okay. Also note that black is a pawn down. Even though white's pawns look ugly, a pawn is a pawn is a pawn. White is up a pawn here. This is a passed pawn. So white wants to use his bishop pair, which is to his advantage, and these open diagonals and open ranks to attack the black king. That is his main plan here, without a doubt. Black's plan is the opposite. Black wants to mute the white attack by blockading, right? And blockading the pawn advance by getting this knight to d5. And this would basically shut down white's attacking chances. And we're going to see. And I want to share with you what Nimzovich, the great grandmaster, said about blockade, because I'm using the term blockade without actually defining it. And Nimzovich says, and I quote, "By blockade, I refer to the mechanical obstruction of an enemy pawn by a piece. This mechanical restriction of forward progress is accomplished by placing one's own piece on the square immediately in front of the pawn to be blockaded." And what he means is, in this case, for instance, by putting a knight or a bishop or a rook or a queen, a piece, in front on the square immediately in front of the pawn to be blockaded. Okay? So that's what I mean when I say blockade, is placing that piece on the square immediately in front of the pawn. Okay, now let's go on. So after queen d6, we see rook a6. Now we see the utilization of the open files and the open ranks. So there's so much open lines, and this is all good. This is all good for white. Black's solidity is what he has in his favor. You know, beautiful pawn structure, and he wants to kind of quiet down white's attack. Okay, so he's doing what he's supposed to do. He's building up on the isolated pawn. But what's most important is you want to control the square right in front of the pawn. The reason why is because you need to fix the pawn. You don't want to attack a moving object. So okay, he's building up on this pawn, but the pawn is still somewhat mobile here. So you want to be able to block the pawn from moving, period. Then you know for sure that you can excuse me, you can attack it. Now, again, we're going to get back to blockade in a few moves. But notice again how white is pursuing the plan using these open files, open diagonals, and ranks. He understands that his pawn structure is weak, but he is using the positive factors in his position to build up an attack against the king side. So the queen moves back to d7 and also alleviates a bishop from this pin here. But notice the danger that's lurking. Rook g4. This move not only protects this pawn, but has the idea of perhaps bringing the other pieces to the g file. It also eyes the f4 square so that in the future, say for instance after a move like bishop c7, the knight is not able to park itself here on this square. Knight f6, attacking the rook, but also with the idea of going to d5, commencing the blockade. Now the rook goes to the h file. Very dangerous because in certain instances, queen might be able to be on c2 and ganging up on this square, h7 square. Now the rook is attacked, the queen, and we see some kind of x-ray possibilities against this bishop on c4. Rook goes to a1. And now g6 is played by Magnus, anticipating the coming attack on the g file and on the king side in general. Now this is pretty dangerous because we can see that this bishop pins this f7 pawn. So that possible sacrifices on these squares lurk in the future. Rook b1, and this idea again is just add additional protection to this bishop, and also there's a cheap threat of bishop takes f7, way in the background. But he's just adding more protection to his piece. The queen goes back to d7, and this is very, very dangerous. Queen d3. One of the ideas is to make room for the rook to enter the attack by playing rook g1, but also at the same time maintaining the protection of the bishop with the queen and keeping the bishop on this effective post right here. Knight d5, there's blockade for you. Now you notice how the bishop is blocked from affecting f7. But here is what is really important about blockade. Not only are you just simply blocking the action of this piece on b3, but blockade squares are excellent post. And the reason why is because of the amount of squares that are being covered by the knight. Also, a frontal attack by the enemy is impossible, right? This knight is well protected on this square. There's no frontal attack available against the knight. Okay? The blockade square is often at the same time an outpost on a rook file, right? Not in this case, but that's an option. And the blockading piece keeps enough elasticity to speed to another part of the battlefield if necessary. So what's great is this knight being centralized and covering all of these squares in enemy territory performs a multitude of tasks. And this knight is flexible enough where if it needs to go back to f6, it can. In some cases, it might need to go to f5. Or sometimes do work on the queen side. It's just in a beautiful, beautiful position. And that's what's beautiful about the blockade. But more than that, we're going to see that now, right, the battle pretty much for the next 10 to 15 moves or even more in this game will revolve around this blockade situation. If black is able to maintain the blockade, he has a good, stable game. The white attack cannot really succeed with this blockade in place. However, if white can remove the blockade, then black's position becomes very precarious and is in danger of collapsing. So now let's look at what goes on in the rest of the game. So rook g1, just placing his pieces in the optimal positions. So now you got all kind of pressure here on the g6 square as well as f7, and then you have this blunted bishop that wants to put pressure on f7. Now just think for a second, after rook g1, if this knight wasn't here on d5, say for instance this knight came here, for instance, the blockade will be released and immediately queen g6 would just be winning. This pawn is pinned right here, cannot capture the queen. And then say after h takes g6, then just simply rook takes g6, again exploiting this pin. And we see the rook here. So the king cannot go that way. The king would have to go to f8. And then say after rook h8, king e7, bishop g5, and there's just too many pieces hovering around the king. And the king would be mated in short order after f6, bishop takes f6, king d6, king f8. See all the squares that are covered. It's just too many squares are covered. And then so king e7 is the only move, and then just simply rook g7, checkmate. And you can see all the squares being covered. Rook, and the king would just be checkmated. So that's why the blockade is so important, that it stops the this attack of white from rolling through. So Karjakin, after setting up his pieces in the optimal attacking positions, he starts fighting against this blockade. And Carlsen, of course, tries to maintain it. Excuse me. So bishop c7 is played. This is fighting against the blockade, because in some lines, rook takes b3 is an option. For instance, if, say for instance here, if a move like rook h5, which is very interesting, and I thought of actually during the game with this double attack. And notice that the pawn cannot capture because this rook on the g file. I don't think it works here, but rook takes b3 is an option in some lines here. Let's go to a time when it might actually work. So Magnus played bishop g5. Not Magnus, I'm sorry, Karjakin played bishop g5. The idea is removing one of the defenders of d5, because we see the queen and rook are helping support this knight here on d5. So rook e8. So now we just have the queen supporting d5. So now what? Queen c4. So now we see two pieces attacking this knight on d5. So he's trying to break this blockade. Now what? Magnus fighting to keep the blockade alive. He plays rook b5. Now this is where the game becomes very interesting, because many people on different servers and analysts, around the world, were looking at the real obvious move, bishop a4, which I think Carlsen probably should have played it. I mean, not Carlsen, Karjakin should have played here. I mean, it looks so plain. You know what it is? I think the move looks so simple that it can't, he's probably thinking it can't be right. Like a 2800 player is going to allow this triple skewer of rook, queen, rook here, winning the exchange here. And one of the main lines that was being brought up or discussed was bishop a4, and then with this move queen f4, the idea, let me show you just the primitive idea, was basically, if bishop takes a rook on b5, then queen here, with the idea, of course, of rook to g2, and then rook e1 with disappointment, and then queen f1, of course. Rook takes f1, bishop takes f1. So what Carlsen, excuse me, I keep getting the Carlsen Karjakin because the first three letters throw me off in my excitement. So what Karjakin played was queen f5, which I criticized at the time as being a defensive move because I felt that this gave Carlsen enough time to beat back the attack. Because when you have the initiative, and Kasparov was a great master of having playing the initiative, you have to keep pressing the opponent. Karjakin here did not have a big enough advantage to really just give Magnus time in the position to construct a proper defense. Remember, this is about this blockade, removing this blockade on d5. So therefore, he should keep doing moves in that direction. And so he has to work this out. Bishop a4, queen f5, and then find this move, queen f1. So now you still have this situation. And now, if, for instance, queen takes f3, then you have queen g2. So now the queen f5 move doesn't work because of this. Let's go back. So now you have to find an improvement. So now, instead of course, now we know queen g2, queen f3 check does not work. Rook b1, right? Trying to introduce tactics into the position. And the idea here now is to draw the queen away. So queen takes b1. And of course the idea is not queen takes b1, but now to play queen takes f3 and rook g2. And of course there's no rook to e1 check here because the queen is here. And then a move like knight c3 with some complications. And then now, of course, the bishop has to be left here. Then we have queen f1. Knight takes a4. And bishop d2. Where white, white is up the exchange here. He's giving back his pawn. Now it's 3 pawns to 3 pawns. But white has the exchange. And this would be the type of position that we would be going in. White is also relinquished, of course, the bishop here, but he has the exchange. So basically, he's exchanged his advantage. One advantage, which was the bishop here, and this attack on the king, and he's kind of cashed it in for the exchange. And is it enough to win? Well, only a thorough analysis would be able to determine that. But right here we can see that white has this advantage of the exchange here, and also these weak squares around the king. So it's an interesting position that could arise. But I do feel that not Magnus, Karjakin definitely had to try to go for it with bishop a4 here. So queen c2 was played, which I criticized at the time as a defensive looking move. Now Magnus played this move, which was interesting, rook to a8, introducing tactics in the position. Again, it's kind of like he's trying to fight fire with fire here. This move was suggested by a lot of people using engines. And when I was looking at the game, I was just going, off the top of my head, not using, had like, old school, just looking at the chessboard and stuff like that. And, very, very complicated position. But this was like supposedly the engine move was rook b4 at the time. And then I guess the follow up, say after bishop c4, was this move rook c8 with this pressure here. Or another idea is bishop c4, queen f6, rook c1, and it looks like in this position, bishop d8, white loses the battle for as far as the maintenance of the blockade here. So for instance, after rook takes e4, rook takes e4, f takes e4, bishop takes g5, bishop d5, and queen f6, rook d1, queen f3. We have a perpetual. Excuse me. White wins the battle. He keeps his. Black loses the battle of the black blockade. Right, he gives that up. White takes over, but he gets a perpetual with this repetition. So rook b4 was given there as a draw after queen c2 was played. However, Magnus is a human, and he played a quite human move. Here, bishop c4 was played. Again, bishop a4 is possible, and I think Magnus here was planning on giving up the exchange here with the same idea of rook takes a4, queen takes a4, and with this idea of queen f5, leaving the rook on prise, which after queen takes b5 is a perpetual. Notice that there's no rook to come down here. So let me just show you. After queen takes b5, queen takes f3, rook g2, and again the queen can't come here. The queen would be lost. Just simply queen takes queen. So the only defense is rook g1, queen f3, and that's how the game would end. So that was Magnus's idea with playing a rook here. So Karjakin, seeing that bishop a4 leads to a draw, he attacked in this way, played bishop c4, and again he's still fighting against the blockade. You might ask, well, how is he fighting against the blockade and control of d5? It is because he is attacking one of the supporters of d5. You see? So it's kind of like he's attacking the d5 square and the knight on d5 indirectly by attacking one of the helpers, attacking one of his friends. So look what happens. Now Magnus stays on the same rank. Notice he's still helping. He stays on the same rank, and he has the additional idea of trying to weaken White's attacking possibilities by forcing the trade of rooks here. So there's a lot of little subplots going on here. So he sees, okay, I might not be able to keep the blockade going. He knows that, hey, if I lose this blockade, my position might collapse with all of these, these bishop here on the board, these rooks, queen. So he says, hey, if I can't hold this blockade, let me trade some of White's forces down. Bishop d2, same idea. Again, removing the attacking the pieces that are supporting the blockade. So again, now we see we're back to square one, where the queen is the only piece supporting this poor knight here. So the knight has a lot of pressure on it. So after bishop d2, rook a4 is played. Queen d3. And now Magnus decides to play for this exchange of rooks. And Karjakin obliges. Now, if he tried to, say, avoid the exchange of rooks, then queen c6 is possible. And also, maybe even bishop d8, attacking this rook, is possible also. So some interesting play could have occurred after bishop c1. It's another idea also. Then of course we could continue on with attacking d5. But then after queen f6, with the same concept, then we have this game that's dynamically balanced here. So Karjakin opts for this simplification. Rook takes a1, rook takes a1, and now king g2. So although material is removed from the board, White is still exercising a lot of pressure in this position. Knight e7. So now Carlsen feels safe to remove the blockade, because he's like, hey, this rook is not here, and he doesn't have to worry about this sacrifice here. Furthermore, of course, he's not just moving the knight away for the heck of it. His idea is to come here to f5 with the knight, attacking the rook, and with these double pawns here, the knight does not have to worry about being removed with the pawn anytime soon. Furthermore, the knight being on f5 helps attack the d4 square. So knight e7 is played. However, Karjakin finds a good move here, and again, with the removal of the blockade, that translates to attacking opportunities in this game, because the blockade, the knight was shutting down some open files, open diagonals rather, for White. And see what I'm talking about, what happens after the blockade has been removed. So Magnus, I think, underestimated White's possibilities here. He figured that, okay, one of the rooks have been exchanged, now I can remove the blockade. But now watch what happens. Bishop takes f7 check. And I'm not going to say Magnus didn't see it, But that was definitely a nice blow by Carlsen. Excuse me, by Karjakin there. He might have been maybe expecting to move like Bishop C3 or something like that, and then go for some trades with Knight F5 check, after Bishop C3 or something like that. Although with after Knight F5, after Knight F5, a slick move is a move like Rook takes H7 there, and getting that pawn and then playing that. However, Magnus plays Bishop takes F7, exposing the king even more here. So after king takes F7, queen takes F7 check, and Magnus plays king G7. He has to be careful here, because if he plays a move like king E8, then he's lost after rook takes H7. This idea threatening this brutality, winning loads of material and then checkmating. So for instance, say I don't know, there's really not much he could do here. I'm trying to show some kind of example. If he tried to escape here, so for instance, if he played queen to D6 there, this move is just killer with the X-ray attack on the knight there. Or if he tried to make room for the king by playing a move like here, for instance, then just simply rook takes E7 check, and then this queen will fall unprotected. And of course, if just king F8, then the same idea. Rook takes H7, threatening mate. So king G7 forced. And now, if you looked at my last video, it's entitled Positional Pawn Sacrifice. And this falls under that also. When I saw this, I saw immediately the idea in the next move, D5. Now, it looks real simple now because you see the king and the rook here lined up, and you see the idea of bishop forking or skewing, rather, playing this check move and capturing the rook. But even more, the idea of the positional pawn sacrifice, again, is not allowing the blockade to occur. And what this move does is it opens up the diagonal for the bishop, for white's bishop. But meanwhile, it takes away squares from the black pieces, from the enemy pieces here. That's one of the ideas of the positional pawn sacrifice. So for instance, a move like this, he would be in a whole world of trouble after just a simple queen D4 check. And say knight F6, and then bishop H6. And white will be winning. And say after this move, you should be able to see this, just simply queen takes C7. So the pawn is immune, and he's opening up for his bishop. So knight F5 is played, trying to counteract black's activity. Simply check. King moves. Bishop takes A1. Knight takes H4 check. And queen takes H4. Queen takes D5 by Magnus. And now we see this drawish looking 3 to 2 um, pawns on the king side ending. It's very difficult because of the nature of the double pawns. And of course, Karjakin would love to take this pawn right here with this next move, but there's a slight problem, and it's the g5 square, which would lead to immediate draw by repetition after queen g5. Say, for instance, king f1, king g2, queen g5, and we'll just go back and forth. There's no getting out of it. And of course, he wouldn't take the bishop, and that would lead to a draw. So instead of taking this pawn, Karjakin tries a few other ways to win and put pressure on Magnus. And Magnus, of course, wants to go into the pure bishops and versus pawns endings, which he feels that he can draw. And this is a separate study in itself, the studying the ramifications of the ending with 3 pawns versus 2 with the 2 bishops, and also even the 3 pawns versus 2 with just the queens on the board. It's probably some endgame studies with similar scenarios. So this game did end in a draw, and but it was an interesting game. And like, I'm just gonna go through the rest of the moves quickly. Basically, Karjakin was trying to preserve the queens on the board, and just he knew it was drawish, but tried to get Carlsen, perhaps to make a mistake in time pressure, something like that. Carlsen defended very well, and just held his nerves together, especially after losing yesterday. And he has white tomorrow. It's looked like a dangerous position, but after any kind of check up here on an h7 or 7th rank, the king would be able to get out. He simply played h5, and the king slid out here. But the main theme, again, is another attempt at trading queens by Magnus. Again, and that's kind of how the game ended. These players, again, another attempt to trade queens. And Magnus held his nerve together. But this is a position I'm going to analyze myself in detail, because I'm just interested in, and I'm wondering if there were any chances for white in this position if he did trade the queens. So we see that Karjakin obviously felt that if queens were traded, he had no chance to win. And on move 74, the players drew the game. But I hope you learned a lot or something about Blockade. That was the main theme I felt in that game. And we saw what happened once Black set up the blockade. We saw that pretty much White's attack was kind of held to a standstill. And then we seen what happened after the blockade was alleviated, after knight e7 was played. And we seen all of a sudden the extra freedom provided to White's pieces allowed him to generate some attacking chances. We also saw earlier in the game where Carlsen missed probably a very important move in playing his bishop to c4. I'm sorry, in having the opportunity to play bishop a4. That was a critical moment in the game, and it's right here on move 32 after queen b5 was played by Magnus. This opportunity right here, which will be analyzed, I'm sure, or not only during the game but after the game by numerous different analysis from grandmasters and different websites. But they'll probably agree that this was the move that had to be played. But again, I hope you learn about Blockade and the power of Blockade, and also why the knight is the best blockading piece. And I didn't say much about why the knight is the best, but as you can see by those arrows, the amount of distance the knight covers, and the knight is able to basically tame opponent's pieces and the aggressiveness just by being in front of that pawn and not being able to be attacked. And we saw for a series of moves Magnus's attempts to maintain the blockade, and also Karjakin's attempts to remove it. And this and seeing the battle of ideas was wonderful. So anyway, as usual, please like and subscribe. Any comments or suggestions, put them in the box. In the comment section, and I'll try to get back to you all. And thanks for those that have subscribed and gave some encouraging words of support. I'll see you guys on the next video.